283 Baker, take two.
The Last Picture Show and What's Up Doc had been released, and they were both very successful. In fact, they were both on the top 10 variety box office list, so I was very happy, and I was also in demand. And Paramount came to me with a script called Addie Pray, written by Alvin Sargent, based on a book by Joe David Brown. And I didn't read it because I was at the moment involved with Warner Brothers preparing a large-scale Western. It was specifically written for John Wayne, Jimmy Stewart, Henry Fonda. It was a big cast. Well, months passed. The script was finished, or at least it was finished first draft. John Wayne turned it down. So sometime toward the middle of the year, I was without a picture to make. And Paramount came back and said, now you're not doing the Western. Will you reconsider Addie Pray? So I read it, and I thought it had some promise, but I wasn't sure if it was something I should do. And I asked my ex-wife, Polly Platt, who'd worked with me on the other 3 pictures I'd made, to read it and see what she thought. Well, she said she thought I ought to try it, and I said, why? And she said, you have 2 daughters, and it might be interesting to you to do a father-daughter story. I thought that was a good reason. She said, if you decide to do it, I think I have an idea of somebody who could play the girl, Tatum O'Neal.
I told him about Tatum. I imitated her whiskey voice. I read a couple of the speeches from the script to him the way she would. He took my word for it, and right there his eyes lit up, and he said, we'll do that, and we'll have Ryan play the father.
I had done What's Up Doc with Ryan. We got along well, and I liked him. And I went to confirm my suspicion about Tatum. Of course, she'd never acted. She was about 8. I went down to visit her down in Malibu, where Ryan was living. So I came in and met her, and she said, hello. And she has this deep voice, And Ryan says, gee, you're looking good. You ought to come out here to the beach and run on the beach, it'd be good for you. And Tatum says, oh, Dad, he's not the type. Well, I looked at her, I said, now, why do you say that, Tatum? Why would you say that? And she said, oh, well, you never take your shoes off, or, always keep your shirt on. And I looked at Ryan and I said, she'll do. And that's how she got the part. I thought if she was that mature to make such a correct call about me being a New York kid, she'd probably be all right. And that's what happened. So then we talked to Paramount, and I said, want Ryan and Tatum O'Neal. We went around and around about it. I said, well, I'm going to do it with them or I'm not going to do it. And we did it. That's how it got started.
How come you're taking me?
Huh?
How come you're taking me?
Alvin Sargent, who was the screenwriter in the picture, we had a long meeting. When it was over, he said, I just want you to know that you made the archetypal director's remark. I said, really, what did I say? He said, you said, Alvin, it's a very good script, it just needs a total rewrite. And I guess we did give it a total rewrite, but not entirely. But the script began in a movie theater where Addie is watching Shirley Temple on the screen, and somebody comes and tells her, Addie, your mother died. Well, I thought, let's just go to the funeral. And we find out it's her mother at the funeral.
Frankie Roosevelt said we gotta look out for one another.
I don't care about Frankie Roosevelt.
But he says it.
That's so?
And the other big thing we changed in the first act was it didn't have an ending, the first act. We needed to have a scene. And I said to Alvin, I said, can you write a scene where they are in the car or something and they're fighting, they have a big argument.
There's a deep one Lincoln. You can take me to Lincoln.
You bet I will.
And then they make up, and then they're closer than ever, and that's the end of the first act. And you sort of get, okay, they're gonna go on together.
Let's go!
Hurry up, Doctor. This baby's got to go winky-tinky.
There was a big section in the book about Trixie Delight, and the whole thing about meeting Trixie and him getting infatuated with Trixie, and then Addie maneuvering her out of the picture and all that at a hotel. All that was not in the script, and I said, let's take that whole sequence and let's make that the second act.
Come on.
The whole last half of the book was Addie at a house with an older woman, and it's a whole other story. We didn't want to use any of that. So we didn't have an ending. And we went to Kansas to shoot without really an ending that anybody was that happy with. which is always a little nerve-wracking, but that's how we started shooting with that kind of situation. What I do when I'm doing a period picture, I always look to see what songs were popular in that year and the preceding few years. And since I had zeroed in on 1935, I looked at a lot of song titles. And I have this book that has a list of all these songs. I come across a song title, It's Only a Paper Moon, written by Harold Arlen and Yip Harburg, who wrote Over the Rainbow. It's Only a Paper Moon, and I saw that title, and for some reason those two words, Paper Moon, just jumped out at me. And I thought, I think it's a good title. I didn't like the title, Addie Pray. It was the name of the book, and I didn't like it. It sounded like a snake or something. So I suggested this to Paramount. I said, I think it was Frankie Blanc. So I said, don't you like this title, Paper Moon? He said, what does that mean? I said, well, it's better than Addie Pray. He said, well, Addie Pray was a bestseller. I said, how many copies did it sell? He says, 100,000 copies in hardcover. I said, well, boy, if we get 100,000 people to see the picture, we're really going to have a hit. He said, all right. He said, let's not talk about it right now. And I was kind of troubled, and I was friendly with Orson Welles, and he was at that time in Rome. So I called him up in Rome, and I said, Orson, can you hear me? Yes. What do you think of this title? Paper Moon. There was a pause. And then he said, that title is so good, you shouldn't even make the picture, just release the title. So I called Alvin Sargent, who was the screenwriter on the picture. I said, Alvin, remember those cut-out paper moons they used to have in carnivals? You know, you sit in the moon, have your picture taken. I said, Polly has a photograph of her father sitting in one of those paper moons. He said, yeah. I said, well, we've already got a carnival scene in the picture. Let's add a scene where she wants to have her picture taken in the paper moon and he doesn't want to do it, something like that. He said, why? I said, well, then we can call the picture Paper Moon and nobody will wonder why. He said, okay. And that's how we got the title. And of course, when the book was reissued, at that time, it came out as Paper Moon.
Hey now, I thought you were going to sit in the moon with your pa.
He ain't my pa.
I think one of the things that Peter liked about how they made films in the old days was that it used to be sort of a ensemble cast, an in-house cast that were used from movie to movie, sort of a theater group of people that were like a big family. And certainly we started doing that on Last Picture Show and on What's Up Doc, and we brought almost all the same actors from What's Up Doc into Paper Moon, and then of course we added Tatum.
Now come on down to the car and let's all be friends. You see me smile, come on, let's
Dear Madeline Kahn, she'd come to see me when I was casting What's Up Doc, and I went to New York to see some actors. I just met with her and I thought she was just funny. And she kept saying, why are you laughing? I said, you're funny. She said, well, I am. She didn't realize how funny she was. So she was introduced to the screen on What's Up Doc, and she was very successful in that. And then when we added Trixie Delight to the movie, she was my first choice. We didn't read her. We just said, you want to play this? She said yes, and that was that.
Everything's going to be all right. You just let me do the talking.
John Hillerman, he and I knew each other from when I was 18, way back in New York. We'd both worked at Joe Papp's New York Shakespeare Festival in Central Park. We were both sort of glorified extras. And he played the teacher in the Last Picture Show, and then he played the hotel manager in What's Up Doc. And those were his first two pictures. I thought he'd be right to play the bootlegger, and then since the bootlegger and the sheriff, they were brothers, I had the idea to have the same actor play both parts.
Where you heading?
We shot those two sequences a few weeks apart so he could lose the weight. He had to really gorge himself to gain weight for the bootlegger, and then he had to work like hell to lose the weight.
Let's go.
Make him say K for old Leroy.
Randy Quaid was another actor we introduced in the Last Picture Show. He was a wonderful natural actor. So I had a small part in What's Up Doc where he played a professor, and then he got a big part in The Last Detail with Jack Nicholson. So he was getting ready to do this, and we were casting Paper Moon, and we couldn't find anybody that was right to play the hillbilly. So I called Randy. I said, listen, I know you're a star now, but do you think you could play a smaller role for me, just to kind of... Oh, he said, yeah, of course I'll do it. So he came down and shot. We had Randy play that part. It was a short scene, but it was very important, and he was terrific. P.J. Johnson played Trixie's maid, and We saw about 7 girls. They were okay. Nobody was great. They all did readings. PJ came in, and as she's walking, she's 16 years old, and she looks at me, she says, "Ooh-wee, you good looking." I said, "You just got the part." And that was it. I thought if that girl has the guts to say that, she'd be all right.
Well, I'm gonna have to be going. It's a long way to St. Louis.
Where are we now?
We just left Plainville. Me and my little girl are going to St. Joe.
You gotta go through Paradise and Waldo and Luray and
Luray,
Lucas
huh?
and
The book was set in the Deep South. Polly and I talked about it, and we thought maybe it'd be a good idea to move it from the South, which sort of was a little bit had been done a lot. Polly reminded me that when we drove across the country in the mid-'60s, there were no hills in Kansas. And so we thought it'd be interesting to shoot a picture in Kansas because it's so flat. So we thought maybe we'd move the whole thing to the Midwest.
I never forgot the landscape of Kansas and how lonely and how evocative it was. It was America with the weathered barns and these houses out in the middle of nowhere that had once been farmhouses. There were no trees anywhere. So I remembered this extraordinary landscape.
And instead of looking for locations in the Deep South, Polly and the associate producer, Frank Marshall, who went on a location scout to Kansas and then eventually Missouri, and that's where we ended up shooting the picture.
One of the great things about the towns that we were visiting is that they were untouched. It was important for us to find them, obviously, in a place that we could get to within an hour, and they were laid out in Kansas. I remember they were laid out on grids. It was very easy to figure how far away these towns were. So we picked our one base in Hays, Kansas for all of the traveling farm stuff and small town stuff, and then we picked St. Joe, Missouri as our big city locations.
Come on.
Where are we going?
We're gonna get us some fancy new outfits with this money you got from your Aunt Helen.
All the stores were created. There were empty buildings. And we were able to collect, counters and glass cases and so on and so forth. We literally had to build, not the exterior, but we had to build the interior of all of those shops. Another thing I did was make sure that all the cars were much older, because one of the things I noticed when I was in Kansas, this was in 1970 or 71, I noticed that no one in Kansas had new cars. Everybody had cars that were at least 10 years old even then. I realized that I had to use things that were much older. I looked at all the photographs of old towns, and in the olden days, cars were parked head in, not parallel parked on the street. And I think that's one of the things that makes it look so authentic, is that the cars are all parked at an angle.
But a little bit of progress had crept into St. Joe, Missouri, so we had to deal with things like parking meters and street lights and signs, modern signs, and they were extremely cooperative in letting us cut down the parking meters and take down the signs and everything, and as long as we put them back. In one case on the parking meters, we did put them back, but we put them back backwards, so we had to put them back twice.
I always get a little nervous before the first day of shooting. A little apprehensive, And then it's a strange thing, but I walk on the set, and there's all the trucks and the crew and the cables and the dressing rooms and all that. And I said, what was I nervous about? This is home. We were preparing the picture, and I suddenly stopped and thought, we're 1935, which is the middle of the Depression. The Depression is always associated to me with black and white. And we had 2 actors who were both blonde and blue-eyed. Little kids, smart-eyed, were pretty. And I thought, it's not going to work. So I thought, I'm going to shoot this in black and white. I just think we're going to get the period a lot quicker. It'll work better. Orson Welles always referred to black and white as the actor's friend. Why, Orson? Because every performance looks better in black and white.
There you are, Peter.
You gotta be No!
Ow!
I hate that thing.
This film, we wanted to shoot and treat it like an old classic 30s, 40s Hollywood black and white film. At that time, Peter was working with Orson Welles. And he was very close, friendly relationship, worked on a book with him. And whenever he came into town, he stayed in his house. And one day Peter said, Orson is staying with me, and I would like you to meet him, you know. And I told him, our next project is going to be black and white, and he'd like to have a little chat with you. So one evening I come over and meet this great man, and so I'm telling him I was testing all these black and white filters in every conditions, and he was listening to me. And when I was finishing a report, what I was doing, and he looked at me, use red filter, my boy. I said, is that right? Only red filter? He says, yes, only red filter. The red filter, it accentuates the red, which a face has a lot of red tones and red colors, and makes that very white, very chalky. Also, if you have the blue sky behind it, it holds back the blue and it makes it almost black. So it creates a big visual contrast.
Mr. Robertson?
That's right.
I'd like a minute of your time.
We decided, let's not have anything out of focus. And Laszlo did a great job, and pretty much nothing out of focus in this picture. That was part of the decision on the picture, to give it a kind of gritty look, a realistic look, feeling of being there. And the compositions were all, you know, with that in mind. Everything was going to be sharp.
For example, I think you could see this in the train station scene where Ryan is buying a ticket, and you see behind the ticket taker, you see some little girls, and they're happy and playing and everything, and that's in the same shot. And because there's so much depth of field, they're in focus, so it has the full effect of what's happening. Rather than cutting to those little girls being happy, you see them in the frame. And when you cut around, you see Tatum in the background, and she's also in focus, but she's sad. So you get the effect of the two things with only 2 shots rather than 4. And it's telling the story. It's cutting in the camera, really.
Of course, if you add filters to it, it's even more difficult because you have to add more light. So it was hot, some of those sets, to work in.
I used these really hot arc lights, you know, burning up. I remember Ryan looked at me and says, you know, this is still the beginning of the picture. He says, you don't want me to have any hair left, you know, at the end of the movie? And I said, I'm sorry, Ryan, you know. And I explained it to him. He says, okay, you are an artist, you know, so okay, do whatever you have to do.
Don't let it bother you.
It ain't funny.
Another aspect of Peter's style that he was using in this movie was to have long takes, to have lots of shots in one without any cutting. So that meant that we were doing 5-6 minute takes where the actors had to remember their dialogue. And the camera crew had to accommodate lots of different moves on the dolly. There were no Steadicams really in those days that worked very well.
I like to have scenes play in one shot, if it's possible. There's quite a few in Paper Moon. The audience doesn't notice it. Nobody in the audience says, oh, there's no cutting. People don't notice things like that. But it kind of draws you in without you knowing quite why. It's like taking a breath and holding it.
Moles, let's give him some money.
No.
The thing that I think was the most extraordinary was this long scene in the car when they're driving. It was about a 4 or 5 page scene, the end of the first act. We shot that scene, I think, 36 times. Now, I had decided that we were going to have no cut in this scene. I felt the camera should just watch them. So I knew it was not going to be easy because while all Ryan had to do was drive the car, and he wasn't really even driving as we were pulling it. He had to pretend he was driving, but that was all. But she had so much what we call business. And then if one of them blew the line, we couldn't just say, okay, let's back up, because we couldn't back up. We would have to go the whole 1.5 miles and then go beyond it where there was a road where we could turn around. Well, we started, and, you know, she'd blow the line. She'd blow a line like in the first few seconds. And that was it. Okay, go ahead. And she was singing and having a wonderful time as we went. We did it 25 times the first day. Never got through it once, not even halfway. Well, we didn't go back for 2 days because we had rain. We went inside and did a couple other things. Finally, about 2-3 days later, we went and started again. And I think we did about 15 takes before we got it.
Why didn't you tell me we're out of Bibles?
You like it in the box too, don't you?
Well, you know you've got an excuse for everything.
Because you blame me for everything.
If we were running...
That, in my opinion, is probably one of the reasons she got the Oscar, was because they could see there was no manipulation, there was no tricks, there was no cutting, there was nothing you could do. That was it. And she did it. And when I see it, it still touches me how hard she worked and how good she was.
Howdy.
Howdy. Get the phone.
Quite often, these long takes would lead to great laughter.
Keep rolling. I got it. Keep rolling. I got it.
We're still going.
But Ryan usually suffered the most. I remember a scene in the downtown hotel where he had to eat about 1,000 waffles because Tatum kept walking up and forgetting her line. It wasn't really a very long scene, but she would walk up and he'd eat another waffle, and she'd forget her line and laugh and go off, and we'd start again, and he'd eat another waffle. And I do think he ate about 50 waffles.
Howdy.
Howdy.
What you having?
Waffles.
I already ate. I had them too.
There were many times in the picture when we rehearsed a scene where I would walk the scene for Ryan or Tatum, usually for Ryan, to show him what I had in mind.
Look there. Aren't you going to go to sleep?
Did you want to hear Jack Benny?
No.
Because I started as an actor, I wouldn't know exactly how to tell him what to do. I'd have to sort of walk it myself and try it and play the scene as a way of figuring out what to do.
You're too young to smoke. Set the whole place on fire.
Now, don't you drop nothing on me, Gene. You take care of those breakables, understand?
We always got a big laugh, that entrance. The first shot, it was very important that her breasts jiggle. We wanted the audience to immediately say, okay, we get it. You know, he's attracted to her for, at least 2 good reasons.
All of the clothes of Madeline Kahn were designed by me and built at Paramount. When she's introduced, it's almost my best costume I've ever designed. I wanted her not to wear a bra, and she was just horrified, that I would suggest such a thing. We had to actually cut out the bra itself. We gave her the support of the bra, but we cut out most of the fabric in the front of the bra so that she would definitely have jiggling breasts.
Love it, all this white.
I wanted Ryan to wear a seersucker suit, which is a kind of fabric that is basically striped, white and gray, and it has these little wrinkles in it. It's not smooth. And I went through all of Paramount's clothing. They had, old clothes that had been used in other movies. And I pulled this seersucker suit because there were doubles and triples on it. But it was only after pulling them that I saw the tape inside that they had been George Raft's clothes in a movie, but didn't say the movie, unfortunately.
And how come that man called me a boy?
I don't know. Maybe it's because of what you got on or something.
The Huck Finn outfits were pulled from Paramount. I actually designed and made all of Tatum's dresses. The reason her character goes through a change is because of her, because she's so clever, they start earning more money. So I wanted it to show in her clothes.
I ain't getting back in that car, not till she gets out of it.
The sequence on the hill, Madeline Kahn, all that stuff that she did there, she's brilliant.
You like Mickey the Mouse? Oh, son of a bitch!
Virtually everything was 1 or 2 takes. And she has a line in the culmination of the speech. The final line is, "So what do you say, Addie? Huh? Just for a little while, let old Trixie sit up front with her big tits." And when in rehearsal, Madeline said, "I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say breasts." I said, "Okay." And just before we were going to shoot it, I went over to her just before and I whispered in her ear. Nobody heard me. I said, "Say tits once." And I walked away. I didn't know whether she'd do it or not. She got to that moment and she said it.
Let old Trixie sit up front with her big tits.
And then her great moment is the way she looks embarrassed having said it. And that was Madeline, feeling it because she'd never said it before.
You want to get away from Miss Trixie, don't you?
The second act was a kind of complicated romantic sequence, basically. I mean, it was a comedy romance and became a triangle. you know, the father, the little girl, and the other woman. And Addie has to break it up. And she does what a woman will do sometimes, any means to get her man back. And she did.
Don't knock, use a key.
And she felt guilty about it, which we showed.
All right, let's cut this ring around Rosie. Where's that money?
One day, Alvin Sargent and Peter Bogdanovich came to me and they said, there's a scene in the movie where the sheriff is looking for the money and it's hiding in plain sight. How can we have the money hiding in plain sight where the sheriff can't see it? What do we do? They came to me with the problem, and Paramount had the most beautiful old laces and velvets and silks and buttons, and I remembered this extraordinary brown lace, and the lace was quite intricate, and I realized that if I designed a hat for Tatum, which in my mind was the hat of her mother, I thought we could have the lace go around the hat, and then we could tuck the money right into the lace, where unless you were really looking for it, nobody would really know it was there. So the hat itself was designed as they were doing improvements on the script. So that's how that came to be, and they were very happy with my solution.
There was a few stunts in the picture, some very good driving there. And Ryan insisted on doing all his own driving. And some of it was a little dangerous. One place, Tatum's up on the boxes, and he does a curve, and if those boxes hadn't been attached, which they were, she would have fallen off. She screams, and that was all ad lib. We didn't know it was going to do that.
What's the matter?
Damn bridge is the other way.
What?
Hang on.
Where you gonna go?
Don't worry about me. I got plans, new ideas coming in every day. Get going.
We were ready to leave Kansas, and we still hadn't figured out the ending.
Polly and I were in Kansas on our cross-country trip, and we were looking for a particular farm or something. And suddenly we realized we were on these back roads and dirt roads, and we were totally lost, and they weren't on the map. We saw this little rise, and we drove up this hill, and we got to the top of the hill, and I was trying to find out where we were, and Polly turned around and said, "Oh, this is nice. This kind of looks like the road to nowhere. Take a picture of this."
The road itself was white chalk, the sides were grass, and the road simply went on forever. It was just the longest white road I had ever seen.
And they showed it to me, and I'll never forget, Polly showed it to me. She says, "I don't know what this is for, but it's a good road."
The brake! The brake!
It don't work!
Now, we had established that the brakes were faulty on the truck. That was one thing, in the back of my mind. And we also set up this whole elaborate thing in the first act, which we didn't really deal with at all in the second or third act, which is, you owe me $200.
I want my $200!
Hold on.
That was what triggered it, you know, because I had learned you have to pay off a joke. Pay off a joke means put a finish to it. And this was a kind of running gag. Somehow I thought, that's it, we got to pay that off. And now we also had another thing to pay off, which was the photograph in the paper moon, which we'd never done anything with. And it all kind of came together at once. What if he drops her off at the end, she misses him so much she runs after him, he stops on the road to have a cigarette. While he's sitting there, he notices that she's left him a photograph. She runs up the road. He's kind of annoyed that she's there, even though he's secretly happy, and says, "I told you I don't want you riding with me anymore." And she says, "You still owe me $200.
How's luck?
And the brakes are faulty, and so we shoot it on that goddamn hill, which we didn't know what to do with, and the truck goes down the hill, and they run after it, and that's the end of the picture. But we had to shoot it before we left Kansas, because the road was in Kansas, and we were going to St. Joe, so it was the last-minute decision, and we went out there and shot it. So it all came from a comedy maxim, which is pay off the joke. It was a road picture. They were on the move. So I thought, why not? We'll end each act with the car driving away. First one ends with dust. Second one ends with rain. And the last one is the long road off into eternity.